great to have you here today, Don. We're going to be talking about your panel, which I know you've been facilitating since September, CPG in an era of e-commerce and frictionless market. So with no further ado, Don, I thought maybe I'd just turn it to you for a brief introduction.
Thanks, Tom. I'm an innovation consultant currently. I've been facilitating Convet.it panels for a little while, and I am an expert in CPG, or consumer packaged goods, and I've worked at almost 40 years in the CPG innovation space. So this is a really exciting panel for me to be part of, and I think we've been learning a lot over the past 6 or so months, and we'll talk about some of that today. We have a pretty diverse panel, quite a few experts in CPG. This week, the theme that we're going to talk about today is about global e-commerce, and we do have a couple experts in China. Raul and Henry are expert in that area. Paul is at Tesco in the UK. We have Joan is from Indonesia. We have people with experience all around the world, which is very helpful. We also have people who come from a marketing perspective, as well as people who come from a broader business perspective or a retailer perspective. So we get a little bit of each of that.
Super. And as you pointed to, the theme of this recording is around global e-commerce and digital marketing lessons. Were there particular aspects that we're looking at? Is it clearly specific to CPG? Was it even more specific than that?
Well, if you look back at where we started in this discovery board, we started on just the general topic of e-commerce. So there was a lot of discussion on Amazon. There was a lot of discussion on how e-commerce is growing and how retailers are using e-commerce, direct-to-consumer e-commerce, how packaging needs to be different, how different CPG categories are better suited to e-commerce. We talked about digital marketing, social media, but most of all of those discussions focused on the U.S. So this theme was meant to say, let's look outside the U.S. and find countries and brands that are setting good examples in e-commerce around the world and digital marketing as well.
Don, what were some of the main discoveries or explorations that you guys did?
One of the basic questions we asked is whether e-commerce was global or local. And the response was pretty universal and mixed. Everyone says it's global because e-commerce kind of breaks down borders and allows things to happen more globally. Yet it's local because in order to ship something to you, it has to come to your doorstep. E-commerce is being global but executed or implemented locally. Digital marketing, a little bit different. It's very easy to have a global strategy. So we intend for brand to be like this all around the world, but yet locally there are some differences, whether it be cultural or language. For everything, there is kind of a global hope and things moving more towards global, but never forgetting that executing locally is required. There are some unique global challenges, however. Currency and payment is an issue. There are IP issues. There's tariffs. There's shipping and logistics, and things across borders can cause problems. So there are definitely challenges globally, yet you can see some very local, regional products and brands are finding ways to travel around the world. We did have a lot of conversations about countries are the ones to watch. I said before, we've talked mostly about the United States, and definitely the U.S. is in the lead in many ways, mostly because of Amazon. But in this discussion, there was a lot of talk about China, specifically Alibaba and how that has changed and grown e-commerce in China, and even WeChat and how that affects the digital marketing in China. We also had discussion specific to UK, which is a very high penetration e-commerce market as well. Yet when we look at the more developing countries, the comment comes up similar to the mobile phones in Africa sort of story. Lagging countries have an opportunity to leapfrog because even if they're behind, they can learn from what other countries in the lead have already learned and then jump right ahead. We didn't have a lot of specific brand discussions, but there was some relating to Starbucks, for example, and their ability to cross cultures and modify in different countries. So the first point, which we've kind of discussed, is that e-commerce is considered a global channel and fulfillment must be local. An insight here is that e-commerce does allow local or national brands to expand and become more global, whether that be into other countries or for, say, the expat who wants to access products from abroad and that sort of thing. Digital marketing is also global, definitely global strategy, but implementation needs to occur at a local level, whether it be different languages or different cultures. There is a belief, you can see Dustin's comment there, we expect a blurring of national borders when it comes to digital, a lowering of barriers to entry across markets and a split between industry consolidation and local specialization. One of the things you do see in digital marketing is just because I live in the U.S. doesn't mean I can't see what people in the U.K. are seeing in the U.K. and vice versa. Now, in terms of challenges, I think there are some challenges that are, even though you can consider e-commerce global, there's still some details that have to be worked out. For example, when you're trying to buy off one retailer's website and that retailer uses their local currency, you have to somehow be able to make payment in that local currency. But then there's also the reality of shipping and logistics. This board does focus on CPG products, and there are some CPG products that ship easily, and there are some that are an absolute nightmare. The cost of shipping very long distances can be prohibitive to some of the CPG sorts of products. There may need to be distribution that is more local, for example. For digital marketing, challenge tends to be more associated with language or with cultures. Raul has quite a few good points when you dig deeper into this board. He has written up quite well Alibaba and how Alibaba works. In this example, he's talking about payment systems, but he also talks about import and setting up merchant B2B, B2C, all sorts of ways that Alibaba is facilitating e-commerce in China. For this key point, we do know the future is global, yet almost the opposite of that is also happening. Individualization is the wave of the future, right? Everybody wants the product that's perfect for them. Traditionally, when we think of global marketing, we think of selling the same thing to everybody all around the world. But really, this individualization movement or personalization is also happening. For example, global data will inform how to better appeal to an individual. This idea of individualization across borders makes a lot of sense. So when you think about individualization at a local level, it's really being informed by global data, and Anthony talks about that here, and he knows it pretty well. He's at Oracle. Yeah, no discussion of global e-commerce can go on without discussing Alibaba. Now, what's interesting is we have been talking in this board for about 6 months, and in that time, there wasn't a lot of discussion on Alibaba, which is one reason we opened this up to be a more global discussion. But once we did that, of course, what we hear is Alibaba, in many ways, people will talk about it as being the Amazon of China, but in many ways, it's more than the Amazon of China. Alibaba has had the benefit of learning a lot from Amazon, but they are also creating kind of a whole marketplace within China. They are B2B, they are B2C. Raul, like I mentioned, has written up a lot about them in here, and it's hard to do it justice in individual quotes, but he talks here about their learning from Amazon and kind of making it better. Joan is from Indonesia. She added that it's not just Alibaba, it's AliExpress, Alipay, Ali this, Ali that, and how they create kind of their whole system. We can't talk about China without discussing WeChat. Now, WeChat is kind of like Facebook and an e-commerce thing all in one. A combination of WeChat and digital and Alibaba make for a great growth potential for e-commerce and digital marketing in China. So this brings up the leapfrog example. We did have Scott McDougall is from Canada, and he mentions that, we're further behind, but we're growing at a staggering rate, and we have a lot of opportunity, and, don't count us out. He did talk also in the board about how they see a different Amazon than a U.S. person sees, and they have some limits of what they can buy and that kind of thing. So there was a little discussion going on about how that might differ. Dustin here talks about this idea of the leapfrogs. It can very well be in emerging markets, they can build on the Alibaba, Amazon approaches or learn from Tesco or learn from Walmart how they're implementing these things in their countries and then bring it to the international world. Speaking of other countries, Paul Wilkinson, who works at Tesco Labs, which is kind of the innovation arm of Tesco, he talked to us about how online grocery shopping is happening in the UK. So he's saying here they have 4 supermarkets which have coverage of the country covering 99% of the population. Now, even though only about 10% of groceries move this way, they have the ability in 99% of the population to deliver your groceries within an hour. Someone had commented in the board that, the United States is geographically challenged, like in my situation where I live more in the middle of nowhere. And he talked about in mainland Europe, in continental Europe, that there are some places where they have a little bit more of a challenge, but sometimes they use fulfillment centers in addition to their own stores in order to provide home delivery. And we have talked about home delivery in the past in this board, and everyone is expecting this to grow and grow, especially for products that are in the CPG arena. So, there might be people who are not interested in choosing a fresh avocado online, but they're very interested in having their toilet paper delivered. So this is especially important in CPG. We did open up for examples of brands that were doing a good job globally. We, of course, talked about Alibaba, Tesco as retailer examples, but the ones that were offered up here, and you hear this a lot, Starbucks, maybe not a CPG example, but here Henry is talking about how Starbucks executed in China in a Chinese way. And then Janelle mentions that Unilever is starting to do some work around global photo standards. How you present your product or brand online in one country versus another. Now that, say, on the internet, you can actually see other countries' versions of that same brand. So trying to find some sort of global brand architecture.
Where's the natural segue into what happens next?
So actually, the next theme that we are hitting on is how to look at the Toys R Us bankruptcy situation and say, what does this mean for brick and mortar? What could brick and mortar do to save themselves? Actually, we just we're in the process of closing that theme, and then the next theme is going to be on frictionless e-commerce opportunities. So, the title of this board is CPG in an Era of E-commerce and Frictionless Markets. And, frictionless meaning that there are no issues along the way. And there are a lot of things that e-commerce does to make the shopping experience frictionless for the consumer. And we're going to talk in there a little bit more about what else can happen in e-commerce to make it even better.
So, Dawn, thank you very much for making some time today to recap all these insights. If there's one thing that stood out to me, is that there's a lot more detail happening inside the discussion. So hopefully the listener of this is now more encouraged to go back and leave some of those more finite comments. But for now, Dawn, thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Tom.